بندر عباس
هر کس ترامپو بکشه $100 میلیون جایزه به این هشتگ مراجعه کنه.
The scum, that's the way they act, and that's the way they've done it for 47 years.
Just weeks ago, Washington and Tehran were talking about turning a leaf over, and now they're exchanging strikes. The memorandum appears to be dead. Ali Khamenei's funeral procession is taking place. The Strait of Hormuz is once again a battlefield, and Iran itself may be entering its biggest political transition since 1979. On Eye for Iran, we go beyond the headlines. Was the memorandum ever really about peace?
That to them was a gamble that was kind of worth it.
It's really difficult to take the MoU seriously.
Has a line been crossed, though? I mean, they shot at commercial vessels. Has a line not been crossed? And then the
it
Americans
seems to me
retaliated.
that the line is always being pushed.
Likely and entirely possible to get back on track.
Did Khamenei take Velayat-e Faqih with him?
The theological premise of the Islamic Republic itself, it most likely died with Khamenei.
And 6 months after the January massacre, why is Khamenei's funeral crowd size getting more attention than the tens of thousands of Iranians killed by the regime?
What is happening inside Iran, the way international media is covering it, is absolutely disgusting.
I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Just weeks ago, Washington and Tehran appeared to be moving towards a diplomatic breakthrough. Today, the memorandum appears to be effectively dead. But perhaps the question isn't why it collapsed, if it was a failure and this and that. It's whether if it was ever meant to deliver peace in the first place. Was it an agreement to end the conflict, or maybe it was to manage the conflict? Joining me now is Jonathan Sayeh, research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, the FDD. Arash Azizi, he's a historian and contributing writer to The Atlantic. Fatima Al-Asrar, a senior policy analyst at the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies. And Itai Reuveni, he's the director of communications at NGO Monitor. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a great group.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, guys. So let me start with what I think is a, defining question of this week. Did the MoU, was it about failure, or did it fundamentally change the rules of conflict? In essence, have we been thinking about the MoU all wrong? Was it ever designed to deliver peace, or maybe it was to create a new set of rules when it comes to confrontation? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Well, if you ask that question from a person like Mohsen Rezai from the IRGC, he laid out his opinion very clearly that he was talking to the opponents of the deal inside Iran, clearly stating that fear not, this MoU was not meant to last to begin with, which really is indicative of the IRGC's mindset here, thinking that they can either impose more by escalating because they don't feel deterred by any means, and worst case, they can absorb another round of attacks and move on. So from their perspective, it was more or less not a lose-lose scenario necessarily, unlike what we thought. But to your earlier point about whether this MoU was necessarily seen as black and white, one side lost and one side won, in both camps, there was strong opposition to them. So both from the U.S. side and from the Iranian side, you notice that neither side was really fully content with how it played out, which was maybe in its own way doomed to fail.
Arash, what do you think?
Well, I certainly don't think it was doomed to fail, and I don't think, in fact, I don't think it has failed actually yet. It's true that the president said it's dead. It's true that there's some resumption, but I think both sides really are not interested in restarting the war in a sort of full-scale level. So I think it's likely that the MoU can continue. And what will this MoU do? It will basically stop fighting between Iran and the United States, restore the trade in the Strait of Hormuz, and provide for talks about the one issue in which the United States has the major bone with Iran to pick, which is the nuclear issue. Now, I don't think this will happen smoothly. I don't think it will happen during the 60 days. But I think it's very important to look at the debate inside Iran. Jonathan pointed out to Rezai's comments, but I think it's perhaps more important to look at the fact that the major architects of the deal, i.e. people like Pezeshkian and Araghchi and Ghalibaf, Pezeshkian is not really a major architect of it, but as someone who represents that side of things, they were attacked heavily by the ultra hardliners in Iran, right? The Pezeshkian and Araghchi were chased down in the streets during Khamenei's funeral while they shouted slogans against them. They said, we don't want the MoU, we want to kill Trump. So basically, look, Iran has a basic choice. Does it want to continue escalate things with the United States and continue fighting a war with the United States, or does he want to wind things down and perhaps even get to an agreement that would lift the sanctions on the Iranian economy and change things in this way? It has a choice to make, and it has an internal debate about this. I don't think this debate is settled, although the major leadership, major leadership figures seem to be more interested in dealing than continuing the war. I think they're very averse of. They know that it's going to be tough for them to return to war fully. What they have to countenance, though, is that they have to realize they obviously can't keep the control of the Strait of Hormuz. They have to live with the other GCC countries that all have a benefit in this whatever going to normal ways. So what we've seen in the last little while is IRGC and Iran panicking and acting out and threatening this MOU kind of foolishly and much to their own, much to their it's bad news for themselves that they've done this. But I think it's likely and entirely possible to get back on track and find an off-ramp.
What do you think, Fatima? Is the U.S. and Iran going to get back on track, or is this MOU meant or designed to create this kind of tit for tat in a sort of managed way, if you will?
I think it's really difficult to take the MOU seriously. We haven't seen anything implemented from A to Z. Nothing is perfect. I think the expectations also from the administration, from everyone, that this is going to be just, it's going to go as far as it can go. They're going to test it. Both of them are going to test the limits. But what we're seeing right now is that whatever remnants of the regime is in the Iran is testing the limits to, the maximum that it could. Because ideally, when we saw the MOU, I think that there were so many concessions that were given to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that was slightly strange to see, from the big generous package to the series of postponed decisions, and then you saw real inconsistencies in terms of what the administration initially stated and what it had settled. So they kept moving the goalposts whenever they wanted to, and that's on the Trump administration. There was just a continuous inconsistencies in what was demanded, and even if you contrast with the Trump administration in the first term, where it emphasized maximum pressure campaign, it had a very hardline decision on the ballistic missiles, nuclear file, the proxies, and none of that was important for this agreement in the memorandum of understanding. So you postponed the issue of the nuclear file. But then when it came to the proxies and when it came to ballistic missiles, to have, one of the highest voices in the administration say that Iran has the right to defend itself, therefore it can continue furnishing these ballistic missiles. And then you saw the other parts where Iran is keeping all of its options open, but it also wants to it wants to have the guarantees, and these guarantees are the proxies. So linking with Hezbollah is such a huge deal. This should not have been a party to the agreement, but it successfully linked. And in my opinion, I think that the current escalation could also be related to linking with the Houthis, because the Houthis were just, there was a plane that went from Iran to Sana'a airport to get the Houthi delegation to go to Tehran to attend the funeral of Khamenei. And there was, almost there was an incident in the sky, because this is a violation of Yemen's sovereignty. It's a violation of the blockade that was imposed on the Houthis. And the issue of smuggling is really important because you want to cut off access to this group. And I think that what the IRGC wants to establish is that, to secure the positions of all of the proxies through this deal. So they're going to continue pushing, moving the goalpost from, either side. But I think that, unfortunately, the IRGC has leverage.
What do you think, Itai? You are also directly impacted by this as someone who's in Israel.
true. It's first of all, just to comment on the agreement itself. I think the agreement, the reason it's a perfect reflection of everyone's short-term interests. The regime was afraid that Israel and the US will continue the attacks, was afraid that it would collapse. The US, in some point, understood that war is not good for business. Trump spoke about it a few times, and including pressure from other powers internationally. And it reflects like this very fast, almost, I would say, immature agreement that's saying, okay, let's do something. If it will work, we have peace or no war or lack of war situation. But if it will fail, so then we can always say, oh, one of the sides is to blame. That's what the agreement. Regarding how it perceived here and how it affected on us, I will say that the point of Hezbollah is maybe was the most prominent in the discussion here. Right, of course, everyone speaks about the nuclear ability of Iran, everyone speaks about the ballistic missiles, about how the Iranians mocked Israel after this agreement. But the real axis point is Hezbollah. Because the minute we disconnected Hezbollah from the regime, the Iranian regime is probably losing its most valuable asset in the Middle East. And trust me, it's a huge asset. Therefore, the direct agreement with Lebanon, for example, was perceived very badly in some of the Iranian regime parts. Because you bypass Iran and you can speak with the Lebanese. I think that most of the people here in Israel, like it goes without saying, they just not believing it will work. We see the Iranians are just keep attacking, keep annoying and checking the Americans and the Israelis' limits. They know how to play it very right. The big question is what will happen when someone will cross the line. If the US will break everything and that's it, or
Has the
whether
line
we
been
continue
crossed,
to
though?
scale.
I mean, they shot at commercial vessels. Has the line not been crossed? And then the
It seems
Americans
to me that
retaliated.
the line is always being pushed, and because no one wants to break, to break everything and start and to be the one that's starting the big war, let's call it, on the third round or the fourth round of a big war. It looks like I'm worried that we are going into a period of time where we just, short rounds. It's like games of cat and mouse all the time between this triangle of Israel, the US, and Iran, and until something will change. And I think that's the most worrisome situation that we have.
Yeah, it appears to be that way right now. And Israel Hayom is reporting that the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, told Witkoff and Kushner that, you know what, we can't control, as the government of Iran, we can't control the IRGC if they start shooting at commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. A, what does that indicate to all of you? And B, why now? If, as many of you pointed out, there is a lot of leverage for the Iranian regime out of this MOU, why would you do this? Why would you test the limits, so to speak, as Itai had just said? Arash, we can start with you, and then people jump in after.
If we are to believe that Araghchi told Witkoff this, and I always take these media leaks with a grain of salt, but if we are to believe them, if you believe that he told him that, I'm not sure I believe him. I'm not sure that the IRGC is acting sort of on itself. I think it's a useful negotiating tactic, to be like, you know what, these guys, we can't even control them fully. They go crazy sometimes. It's sort of a thing to say, but I think...
Even Trump called them crazy because Trump was like, they want a deal. And then a reporter said, well, then why are they shooting at commercial vessels? And he's like, well, they're kind of crazy.
No, but so I think the interesting point here is that I think, look, I'm approaching with some analytical humility. Like, I don't think we fully know what's going on, right? But to the degree that one does, my understanding, my assessment and it's not a hunch. It's sort of an assessment based on speaking to a number of people, looking at all the evidence, is that the Iranian command does have a reasonable control over what it does. IRGC just doesn't do a game of its own. If the National Security Council sends a directive and says stop shooting all ships, they will stop. I don't think I'm wrong about this. But you know,
do this. Why now? Was it a smart move for the regime?
No, it wasn't a smart move. But I think the why now, I think there's an internal debate, and that is sort of reflected. I think the reason they do it is that they panic that they're going to lose the control of the Strait of Hormuz. There are some people in the regime. They have also proponents in DC, so you can hear them, on Twitter and other places, who basically claim, I think wrongly and frankly a little foolishly even, that Iran's real leverage is the Strait of Hormuz. So it has to always have the ability to close it. So if they're using this southern route, we're going to lose this ability. So let's close it and show that we can close it. It's not clear where that game ends, because at the end of the day, and Ghalibaf himself, if you listen to his, he went on state TV and he was like, look, we want the Strait of Hormuz to be active and working. It doesn't make sense for us. It's not such a leverage if you're not able to, and if it's not working, it's not much leverage. You're just disrupting it. So I think they panicked, and I think they thought that this is their only leverage, so they tried to enforce it. But let's see in a longer term, Negar, whether they'll understand, right? So this Strait of Hormuz thing, also remember, this was not a thing, as the kids say, before the war, right? Like, since I grew up, every, once in a while, someone says, we're going to close down the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, the Shah of Iran used to say, we're going to close down the Strait of Hormuz. But it was not a thing that you could actually do. Now they found out, actually, we can disrupt global trade. So it's this exciting new little thing we can do. And then they thought, maybe we can get sort of tolls from it. They understand they couldn't really get tolls from it. So this is what they resort to. But I think they're going to have to understand that that's not something that they can do, that it would not be conducive to any deal. And that, as I said, other neighboring countries have a role, and perhaps there can be some arrangements like service fees that some countries can charge, right? Like a reconstruction fund and others. But anyways, the broader issue, as I said, is, can the Islamic Republic do this transition? I understand, okay, we're going to deal with America. We're going to reach some sort of modus vivendi and deal on the nuclear issue and try to enter some sort of can we end this war, basically? Not like the war that has began since like 1979 or whatever, but this current war, can we sort of bring it to a conclusive end, or not? And if they want to end it, while some of the, they're going to have to, they're going to have to shut up about, we're going to kill Trump. They're going to have to shut up about death to America. They're going to have to modulate some of these things. And I think there are enough people in the leadership that want to do that, or want that change, but we're going to see whether they can do it or not. But again, sorry, the last thing I'll say, the question of why are they doing attacks on the ships? I think it's because they panicked and they thought they're losing sort of all control. Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in on why now? Because, I mean, it's obvious if Iran behaves, mainly broadly, they can get rewards, a market for its oil, potentially with India, maybe even Japan, likely to buy barrels if the waiver is extended, but it's hard to realize those benefits if you keep, attacking tankers, for example. Did they think they could actually extract concessions out of this? Or like Arash said, they were just panicked of losing control? Anybody want to jump in?
I'll give it a go. I guess to start with, as to why you would hear like Araghchi claim that the IRGC, he doesn't have control over it or whatever. Of course, we know it's a good cop bad cop scenario. They used to do it between reformists and hardliners, and now they shifted up a bit. Now they're differentiating between political civilian government versus IRGC, saying, "Hey, I cannot contain these guys. Therefore, it is up to you to appease them." And that might be a negotiating tactic in a sense that these guys show up and, speak about everything that they're supposed to. And when it comes to the practicals of it, they all of a sudden pass on to the IRGC. For example, I can see a scenario where Araghchi or whomever gets in front of the Americans and says, we have no ambition to toll the Strait of Hormuz. Then all of a sudden you see the IRGC firing, saying, well, we don't want to. It's the IRGC. We don't have control over them, so you better contain that problem. It's your issue. So this has been going on. I do agree that it's in coordination. I don't think IRGC is mad at Araghchi by any ways. So I do understand that sense of coordination there. But looking at the MOU, Negar, to your point, all they had to do was not to throttle the strait and also agree on a broad mechanism as to what they want to do with their highly enriched uranium. No mention of dismantlement, even no guarantee that they have to get rid of it. It's just kind of broadly agreeing on the mechanism itself. And in return, for the first time since, you can argue, since maximum pressure, they were able to repatriate funds into their central bank, and that was critical. So looking at it from the outside, it seemed like they more or less had got everything they wanted to. As to why they did it right now, I do share that sentiment to an extent, because if you look at the MOU, it says that Iran will not toll it for 60 days. And if everything is calm during the 60 days, it'd be tough for Tehran to all of a sudden claim that, well, now we're going to go back to tolling. That control over it would fade away. And also, this might be an unpopular opinion, but maybe we give them too much credit. Maybe sometimes you have these individuals, not to call them irrational, but maybe there is sometimes an ideological element to it, because it is in your best interest to sit this one down, make your money, repatriate the funds, sell oil to whomever technically, and then broadly agree and delay as much as you can until you figure out the next step. But they didn't do that. So I don't know. Sometimes maybe we overanalyze their capabilities here and there. But then again, maybe they were right, because what was the repercussions for that? They just got bombed a few times over the stuff that has been targeted before. And I can imagine what those targets are. Again, it's probably a few small boats, mostly concentrated in south of Iran, maybe a few communication towers and whatnot. So that to them was a gamble that was kind of worth it. Now they're still, I guess, moving on in that direction. And in return, the consequences were not that high. But the sanction waiver being revoked does not really play into their favor. But the blockade is not there, which means they can still sell those oils to China and figure out their own relationship there. So from the IRGC's perspective, it's still not their worst case scenario.
So are both sides then high risk, high gain? Kind of this gambling mentality?
I wouldn't say both sides. I think from Tehran's perspective, the worst case scenario more or less happened. Maybe not the full thing, but the idea that the US and Israel would fully attack, take out the supreme leader. You had Israelis take out the repression apparatus, to an extent degraded. And they emerged out of that, debatable to whether we can call it victorious, but from their own perspective, their bar was more or less survival, and they got that. So at this point on, it's really a matter of whether they think Trump would come and try to finish the job or not, as we say, or as to whether he would actually pursue major regime change or not. And they don't think Trump at this point would do it. And because of that, I guess their gamble is not that high. I think he's being pushed into the corner. My issue with what Trump says a lot is he thinks his next move of escalation would be going after the energy infrastructure, things of that nature. It doesn't have to be that way. There's other options in place that you can pursue as you're dealing with the Islamic Republic.
But Fatima, I know you wanted to say something in response to what we just heard from Jonathan.
And no, it was all great. I would say maybe I have something to say in terms of the experience in Yemen, because what we saw is through a decade of conflict in Yemen, the Iranian regime excelled on plausible deniability. So they said, we had nothing to do with the Houthis. We didn't arm them. We didn't do anything with them. So they're independent actors. They manufacture their weapons, they manufacture their own Shahid drones. They have the same branding. They have the same slogans, and we have nothing to do with it. So plausible deniability is in the DNA of the system. So when Araghchi comes and says, it wasn't me, it's just the way that they function.
He's IRGC himself, so it's funny to hear him say that.
That's right. So I mean, it's all the system just acting the way this is the way it operates. Nothing has malfunctioned yet. So, but I would say, I think like the biggest confidence boost that things are going to go their way. I would give you the example of the Houthis in March last year when the Trump administration decided to interfere. And then the Trump administration decided that the Houthis are such a threat on the Red Sea because of their attacks on Israel. So it brought the carriers into the Red Sea, started attacking the Houthis, and the Houthis attacked back. And for some reason, after a couple of months of skirmishes, you weren't able to contain this group. And this is a small actor that gets their weapons from the IRGC and other places. But they were also supported by Russia. They were also supported by China in terms of satellite systems, in terms of targeting the vessels. They were able to reach Israel. I mean, they sustained a big campaign. And what was the result of that? After 2 months, the United States folded with a ceasefire. I mean, the Houthis requested the ceasefire, and the United States was very happy to oblige. And that gave, I think, the IRGC the confidence that if this on a micro scale can succeed, on a macro scale with Iran, it's going to be a catastrophic failure. So, if you could not contain a small actor, and I will tell you something, Yemenis were worst off after that because the guessing game started. It's like, what kind of deal is there between the Houthis and the United States? How far can you push against them in terms of resistance on the ground? Houthis started arresting everybody as well on the ground because their vulnerability increased, and Israel attempted to finish the job, which also had consequences on the local population. So, but also the United States, when it withdrew, it didn't. I mean, so initially it was there to help restore freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, but when it withdrew, it did not secure that. 2 months later, you had 2 ships that sank in the bottom of the sea, and this was the anniversary of the sinking of the Magic Sea. This has given confidence for all axis of resistance members, for the Iranian regime, that that the United States doesn't know what the end game is. And we all saw it in the signal gate, right? Because there was division within the administration. I mean, for me, that was it was an eye opener. Because when you see, and I think people don't understand how both Iran and the Houthis and Hezbollah looked at the signal gate and celebrated, because they're saying they don't know what's going on, and we can bet on internal divisions and not even divisions, just different points of view, to help give them, just to help them play the longer game. Because in the administration, you can just maybe, focus on one person or the other and try to appeal to their senses. I know J.D. Vance did not care about civil war in Yemen, right? Did not see that the fact that by supporting, democratic movement in Yemen, that this would actually serve the interest and stability of the United States and subsequently the Red Sea. That wasn't a part of the calculation. So when the long-term strategy from the United States lacks, the long-term, I mean, it kind of gives confidence for the long-term strategy for the other actors to really, continue their operations. And we saw it in the 28th of February, because in no way where you play chess, right, and you take out the king, that the game keeps on playing. We took out, the United States took out Khamenei, and nothing happened to the system. It continued operating, it continued launching, it continued escalating, because the violence, the escalation is their insurance policy. So, I kind of, Hormuz is Iran's leverage. It's Iran's nuclear bomb. That's, the former minister, the former president of Russia was given an interview with Iranian state media during the funeral procession, and he said that's Iran's nuclear weapon. is Hormuz. And the way that it's done is the same way that the Houthis have done it, is that you allow passage for Russia, for China. That would not hurt your economy. The rest you tax. And that's perfect. That's a perfect long-term deal. And, there's unfortunately with the MOU, there's this false sense of progress that, they kind of like handed the IRGC some kind of a geopolitical toggle switch so that they can disrupt global shipping whenever they want to. So they turn it on, they turn it off. If they want to increase the pressure on the United States, they turn it on. So because it doesn't just affect the shipping, it affects the fertilizer and subsequently food security. So it's not the United States that ends up suffering. It's the other countries. It's Asia. It's India. So and that's the power. So I think like the multiplier effects and consequences are just too huge, and the IRGC is so happy with this. Is extremely happy. They realize that they have all the leverage in the world.
I just wanted to conclude, and I wanted to go through each one of you to get your thoughts, and if we could just be in brief so we can get through to everybody. Itai, I'll start with you. So what is, ultimately, what does this MOU represent to you, I should say? Is this essentially military means used for diplomatic ends, that it's, as Arash had mentioned, he's hopeful that it would lead to some sort of negotiation? Or is it a way to just keep this, like you said, cat and mouse, never-ending, low-level testing limits conflict? Or are we going to see, civilian infrastructure hit in Iran, energy infrastructure, going after Kharg Island? There was an Iranian journalist, Hoda Hashemi, who was recently in Kharg Island after Trump had made the warning that he might take it over. And Iranians, they were saying, Kharg Island is not merely an oil terminal, it's home for us.
So first of all, I want one short comment about what Fatima said. Maybe we are playing chess and the Iranians play on another game, and that's one of the things that I found very interesting. Many times we think we know the game. We think that only if we will kill the king, the game will stop. But maybe the other side playing entirely different game with entirely different rules. We just don't understand it enough. And that's an overall feeling sometimes, at least here in Israel. Your question, Negar. I think the agreement basically gives you the ability to dance with all the three options, right? It's so for me, it's so vague, and it's so, even I would say some of the sentences there are so disconnected from the complicated reality just that my colleagues here just spoke about. So it gives you the flexibility to choose, I'm going to contain this conflict. Am I going to decide that this is the red line? Now I'm going to hit the energy infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure. Basically, it's like I said before, it's a short-term tool to contain something that probably was seen getting out of control. Israel basically did whatever they wanted. Trump had so much pressure on him. He I think Arash said, he was pushed to the corner. The Iranians are also afraid that everything will collapse. It's a tool that gives you the ability to lower the flames, to manage the conflict in a very weird way. Most of the things we manage in Twitter between Trump tweets and others. But I do think that if Iran will continue to operate its proxies, continue to push back, in some point everything will flip, and we'll see another round, probably the most violent that we saw in that.
Ash, what do you think? In the MOU, like, what does this MOU represent to you? Is this a way to manage this tit for tat, or is it going to lead to the negotiation? Like you said, I still don't quite understand. Did it fail, or are we just asking the wrong questions here?
No, I think it's a fascinating question. I think it's to manage the tit for tat, is to find an off ramp
to end the war, and I think it could provide for longer negotiations. Look, there are obviously factions, and something Jonathan said that I really have to disagree with this. The idea that the reformist hardliner is just like a game that they play, and I'm sorry, no serious analysis can say that. The game that they play, reformists have spent years in prison. They've gone to long trials. These conflicts are real. They represent the Iranian regime has had differences within it since its beginning, and these differences are important. I'm just reading Samuel Segev, the Israeli journalist, book's Iranian Triangle from 1988. As I'm writing my own book on Iran and Israel. And it's very clear that serious analysts in Israel and United States understood already from the mid-1980s that these guys are different. The differences they have are significant. The differences is how to approach the world, what should Iran's policy be. So the idea that this is just a game and they just, they put a different face on is I don't think it's a serious idea. Okay, so if there are differences, look, there are factions in Iran who seek to come to some sort of rapprochement with the United States. The exact form of that rapprochement and stuff is up to questions. There are many factions in Iran who very openly, if you read and listen to Iranian national security debates, they say all the time, for example, it's obviously foolish for Iran to want to fight Israel forever and want to destroy Israel, because first of all, this is not something that it can do. So why adopt a goal that it cannot achieve and pay a very high price for it? So to focus on your question of what is the MoU, it depends to whom, right? It depends to whom. I think there are many in the Iranian establishment for whom this is just a sort of a time-buying tactic, kicking can down the road, hoping that they can somehow regain some power and be able to throw their weight around and continue to be a very disruptive revisionist power. And there are those who have a more long-term view that, okay, what is the goal? Iran has had a terrible economic decline. In many ways, it's very badly shaped for sort of a future in a multipolar world, and that it needs to use whatever gains that it has had to integrate itself into the regional order somehow and gain a more durable place. And for that, an agreement with the United States that would lift the sanctions and all that, is necessary. But the problem is that would, as I said, require some transformation of this revolutionary anti-American, anti-Israeli ethos that has been baked into Iran since 1979.
Jonathan, your chance to respond and also your concluding
Sure.
thoughts.
Recognizing that we want to keep this more concise, there might be disagreements, but when it comes to the core issues that concern the United States, I yet to see a genuine rift. I cannot imagine a scenario where a hardliner versus a reformist disagreed on dismantling the nuclear apparatus. They were both aligned on keeping that. For example, on the repression front, you saw people be killed under both reformist and hardline administrations, sometimes even worse under reformists. So there might be some disagreements on whether we should toll or not. But when it comes to the core issues, we don't see that. That's why it's insignificant. In addition to that, even if there is meaningful opposition, even if there's opposition, it's debatable if it's meaningful. I cannot imagine a scenario where someone like Pezeshkian can tell the IRGC leader on what to do and how to behave. So that was the core argument that I was making. And of course, you have to look at it in the context of a supreme leader being able to, depending on how they feel and depending on where the country's headed, they can rig elections, have someone get elected and move on. So I don't think there's any disagreement as to some of these insiders calling the shots during sensitive times, depending on how they want to react to the international community and the United States. But to respond to your immediate question as to how this MOU is going to play out in the long term, listen, both sides needed more of a refresher. On one hand, the Islamic Republic economically was suffering. The blockade was one of the very few times that their oil exports were actually zero. You look at the United States, they were running out of interceptors. Their allies in the region and Israelis as a whole, there was a munition problem to begin with, and Trump wanted something very quick, as he does, given his mindset and his business mentality. He didn't want to be dragged into anything longer. So I can see the need for the MOU in that time being something temporary, like others also mentioned. But the reality is Tehran is putting Trump in a box. They're not letting him have a win. Trump wanted to at least have the Strait of Hormuz win, and Tehran even does not want him to have that to begin with. So given that the options are there, and Trump now has an opportunity to respond, it goes back to my earlier point that I didn't get to finish as to what that response should look like. I think the playbook really worked out in the early stages of the war. Go after the repression apparatus, ensure that the average Iranian is more or less better equipped to confront the repressors. And that policy is absent from the Trump administration. He says it more than once that he doesn't see regime change as an option, or he thinks Iranians are going to get massacred, which is true, but that's why they need better equipment. I think the cat's out of the bag as to how we should deal with the Islamic Republic. It is about arming select groups of dissidents in major urban areas, pivoting away from ethnocentric policies like they entertained in the early stages of the war. And that would be the true leverage the United States holds that effectively was abandoned under Trump too.
Fatima, just your conclusion in terms of where this MOU is headed and who is making the right moves here when it comes to playing the MOU.
So the MOU, in my perspective, I called it a memorandum of undoing, because it walked back a lot of the things that it said that it would. It walked back regime change. It walked back protecting the Iranians who were being slaughtered by the regime. It walked back, and postponed the issue of the nuclear talks. It walked back the issue of the proxies. It undid all of these issues. So the MOU gives you this kind of maybe a false sense of progress, and I think it's performative mostly. It's a truce, and that's great, but it's driven by short-term political wins. So there is a very high volatile environment at the moment, and where the problem is the increase on asymmetrical capabilities and asymmetrical miscalculations. That's huge. So any kind of escalation, any type of misunderstanding is going to unravel this document, as we have seen in the past 48 hours, as you have noted with the attacks that have been hailing on Bahrain and Kuwait. I think that there is a maritime capitulation. We're leaving the terms of transit and administration of the Strait of Hormuz open-ended. It's very ambiguous between Oman and Iran. This is not. We're pretty much giving them a de facto geopolitical toggle switch, right? So they can disrupt global shipping whenever they want to. And if they cross the line, then the U.S., sends $1 million missile to disrupt a railway, right? And we get into the cycle. So where there's an on and off, and each of the parties are just testing this agreement and how far they can and how much they can get away with. And I just think that it represents a framework where I think the regime is granted some kind of a formal validation and sanctions relief without being held accountable, or forced to make any kind of structural concessions regarding its regional behavior on the Gulf, and also its behavior on the people. The people have become the people of Iran, the people of Yemen, and everybody who's living under the tyranny of this violence are just are lost, without any kind of concrete resolution. And it's not the job of the United States maybe to secure that, or to secure any kind of regime change. But at the same time, there is no mechanism whereby you can, have any kind of amnesty or relief or communication, or, any type of hope that you can empower civil society, that you can empower people, that you can provide that kind of avenue, or even soft power. All of that is disconnected, and it completely gets dismantled when you start to say that, these guys that you've been fighting have been either the brave guys or the sane guys, or whatever flattering term that you want to give them.
Trump just a few weeks ago saying that they were very rational, reasonable people. Now he's calling them scum. And when he was asked what's the change, he goes, "Oh, well, I got to know them." So we have yet to see what the next phase brings us. Thank you so much to our wonderful, diverse panel for joining us today on Eye for Iran.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This week, Ali Khamenei's funeral procession took place, but the bigger question is whether the system he ruled with an iron fist can survive without him. For the first time since the 1979 revolution, figures inside the Islamic Republic of Iran are openly questioning whether the supreme leader should remain the country's final authority, to have the final say. Are we watching the beginning of the end of Velayat-e Faqih, the doctrine that has defined the Islamic Republic since its founding? Joining me now is Hussein Mansour, a fellow at JINSA. He is also the author of the essay After the Ayatollah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hussein, let me start with the biggest question here. Did Ali Khamenei take the Velayat-e Faqih and this system with him when he died?
In all likelihood, he did. First of all, Ali Khamenei himself, I mean, his credentials to really succeed the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ruhollah Khomeini, depended more on his revolutionary activism rather than even on his own theological bona fides. Most famously, he did not really have the credential that was required for him to become the guardian. He was not an Ayatollah. He was not Marja Taqlid, and these credentials were given to him actually after the fact of his appointment. He ruled for 37 years. Now we have his son appointed by basically the IRGC, and it remains an open question if he is anything more than a rubber stamp. And he definitely lacks all theological credentials. And not just that, as everybody knows, we haven't really been able to hear or see him, which is quite awkward. I mean, even in comparable situations, whether it was Saddam after 2000 and Saddam Hussein, while he was still on the run after 2003, or Osama bin Laden, you still had recordings coming out, at least audio recordings. But all of this points that there is a big question mark if Mujtaba is exercising any power at all. And this points to probably a major transformation in the Islamic Republic itself towards an increasingly militarized regime that sheds away the theological pretenses that it's trying to keep.
Wow. And what effect would that have on the region? What about its proxies? Hezbollah, Shias in Iraq, the Houthis, all of these?
Well, ultimately, these proxies are tied by networks of funding, patronage, arms, so on and so forth. And despite that, there are some religious loyalty or solidarity that is declared, which is less in the case of the Houthis than it is, for instance, in the case of Hezbollah. I don't believe that even with a change in the character of the Islamic Republic or the regime itself, that this will affect much the proxies in the region. What will this affect is likely a decline in the salience of a political Islam as a large ideology that's that believes its own premise and that's able to mobilize across societies in the Middle East. What you can have, or you might end up having, is something that's akin to the Ba'ath Party after the collapse of Arab nationalism. By the 1980s, by the 1990s, Arab nationalism was no longer a believable ideology. It was not really a reigning ideology. Islamism had taken its place, but the structures of the Ba'ath Party were still ruling in Syria. They were still ruling in Iraq. They had proxies fighting on their behalf in Lebanon and in other places. So basically, you can end up in a situation like this. So it's not that political Islam will disappear. You're going to have its afterlife. And afterlife is going to be basically mafias with flags. That is, you have militias that are exercising raw power in the name of an ideology that doesn't actually believe its own premise anymore.
That's so interesting. So if Nasserism or Arab nationalism, if its post-life was political Islam, what you're saying is the post-life of political Islam will then be the name of political Islam, the flags, the patronage, all that kind of stuff, without the actual politics of Islam in it? How would you characterize it?
Without the seductive nature of a mass ideology that's able to offer some sort of an alternative to a secular nation state. And that was basically what the Islamic Republic has done for a very long time for political Islam beyond just the Shia world, for the Shia and the Sunni world. And the birth of the Islamic Republic in 1979 was basically the proof of concept of Islamism. That is, that secularism is not really inevitable. All of these Western ideas about the progress of history and everybody has to become modern and secularized. No. Iran proves that this is not true, that you can have an Islamic Republic in the 20th and the 21st century. And it served as basically the proof of concept of this dream for a very long time. It offered itself as that possibility. I don't think that this is going to be possible anymore. We see even this in the cumulative legacy of political Islam from the past 15 years, or really since the events of the Arab Spring. You had the very unsuccessful attempt at Muslim Brotherhood governance in Egypt, which ended very abruptly. You had, of course, the most disastrous and monstrous form of political Islam arise in ISIS, and which drew a lot of opposition from the Middle East itself, from a lot of Muslim societies to the ideas. And then you have, of course, Syria, which recently been governed by basically what is in effect former jihadist organization, but is now openly shedding these affiliations, at least formally, and adopting the Syrian national identity as the identity of the state and the premise of legitimacy with which it judges. So that shows that the cumulative legacy of political Islam in those last 15 years, that it really ultimately failed to prove its own premise. And I think the current situation of the Islamic Republic of Iran in its crisis, whether its own leadership crisis, which is completely ambiguous at this moment, who actually is running the Islamic Republic, or of course in its actual situation in terms of the economy, the war with the United States and Israel, it basically shows that this proposition that you can have an Islamic state, in that I don't think it's believable anymore. Having said that, that means that still, as I said, the Islamic Republic can still survive in its militarized form. Its proxies will still survive, but that will become even more brutal, more violent, and will become a kind of a more naked exercise of power than even it was before.
Yeah, so that was my next question. I was going to ask you, what impact then does that have on the people if they're being ruled in a, I guess, different way?
Well, even that veneer of claim of legitimacy, well, the Ba'ath is an instructive example. Once the ideological legitimacy disappeared, that is, once no one in Syria or in Iraq was under the delusion that the Ba'ath is doing something called Arab nationalism. And it became very clear that in Iraq, the Ba'ath became just a vehicle for a one-man dictatorship, Saddam Hussein and the military junta around him. And in Syria, very similar things, just the junta, the Alawite minority junta around President then President Hafez al-Assad. The legitimacy, the ideological legitimacy completely collapsed, and these regimes became even more brutal and more ruthless and more exercising escalating levels of violence in order to maintain their power over these populations. And we already can see something like this happening in the Islamic Republic. I think there was a lot of news reports about how the rate of executions that the Islamic Republic is conducting has been actually expediting. You hear some awful reports about them executing people even in hospitals. And that's basically, I think, the only way that the IRGC could maintain its power over the population, given the fact that really the theological premise of the Islamic Republic itself, it most likely died with Khamenei.
But how would they use Islam then to legitimize what they do?
No,
Can they?
It will still, it's on a rhetorical level. That is, it's not necessarily, you still have to have some rhetorical claim for what you're doing, what your policy. But the fact is, I mean, anybody looks closely will find that basically the Islamic Republic, actually for quite some time, its theology has been entirely produced by its political needs. This happened, as I just recounted, and how Khamenei himself became an Ayatollah. That is, the entire process of giving religious authority was actually subordinated to the needs of political authority. Khamenei became the supreme leader, then he had to become an Ayatollah and Marja Taqlid. With Mujtaba, with his son, this even pretense of a process, even that goes away. So you still have the name of the Islamic Republic. You're going to still have operations named after Islamic holy names and slogans, but now in much more clear way than ever, the logics of the behavior of the leadership and the Islamic Republic will be driven directly from the interests of that IRGC leadership.
And can you talk about the origins or the roots of this notion of Velayat-e Faqih? Because it's not part of actual Shia Islam, and we know that the founder of the Islamic Republic, Khomeini, was very much influenced by the teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood and the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, Velayat-e Faqih was an innovative doctrine. As you said, it really has no precedence in Islamic jurisprudence, whether Shia or Sunni.
Sunni, yeah.
And it's purely a 20th century ideology. It really, I think it is mimetic and influenced heavily by Leninism and the idea of the Communist Party, the single party that is made by of primarily intellectuals. I mean, in a secular society, would be intellectuals presided by the chief philosopher king, who administers the correct doctrine politically for everyone and runs everything. And that was the governing paradigm of radical ideology since the Russian Revolution for most of the 20th century. It had huge influence on the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, along with other things. So a lot of their own organizations tended to be inspired, along with the fascist model and so on, by these models of totalitarian politics. That is a very strongly or tightly controlled organization, and on top of it is some sort of supreme guide, which was actually the title that the Muslim Brotherhood came up with, and that somehow did influence the Iranian Islamists later on. Iran has its own story of how it also was influenced with radical politics. There have been obviously a lot of influence of communism for a lot of the 20th century. And then you have, of course, notable intellectual figures like Ali Shariati, who did try to make a Marxist existentialist Shia synthesis, and all of these created radical environment. And within that environment, the founder of the Republic, Khomeini, was able to formulate this novel theory of Islamic governance, in which he derived some analogies based on things that are not political at all in Islamic jurisprudence, which is basically the role of a guardian over minors. So let's say a minor that loses their parents, then you have a guardian and they have an authority over them because they are guardian them. And then he transposed this somehow, and this becomes a political theory about how actually Muslim society should be run. Since the imam is hidden, then you need a guardian because we're like children. We need a guardian now to take care of us till our real ruler returns. And that guardian has to have certain qualifications. And obviously the qualifications that he laid out, ironically, they fit one man and one man only, which was none but himself. And this became then a theory of Islamic governance that then obviously the Islamic Republic was based on. And now, given where we are today, likely the last person who've ever had any experience in actual fiqh or actual Islamic law, actual faqih, to have ruled the Islamic Republic would have been Khamenei himself. So I think even that doctrine is very clear, in the case of Mujtaba, is over. But it is indeed was the foundation of this Islamic legitimacy that the Islamic Republic depended on for a very long time. And it was nothing but the invention of Khomeini himself.
And, it's interesting. This week, we even had figures inside the Islamic Republic that are openly questioning whether the supreme leader should have the actual final say and authority. What do you make of that?
Well, I think first of all, nobody actually heard, as everybody knows or seen. We've only read statements that supposedly were produced by his office. But as a matter of fact, given how right now you have basically a collective leadership of 5 strong people, and I don't think if the Islamic Republic does survive, I mean, ultimately there are still major economic issues. It's not clear how things are going to end up with the United States and what the President Trump is going to do in the current circumstances. But let's just assume, for the sake of the argument, that the Islamic Republic does manage to limp along for some time. It's not very. There is no precedent to having a really collective leadership of 5 people. Ultimately, someone will have to rise on top. Likely, this will be General Vahidi, the head of the IRGC. And there is at this point, there is really no justification for somebody like Vahidi to take really commands from somebody who's junior, like Mujtaba. And ultimately, if there is no one to actually fill, we can find a new theory, exactly like Khomeini found the theory of Velayat-e Faqih, the guardianship over the minors. We can find a new theory, basically, since there is no one who is actually qualified enough to now fill that role. Maybe then the role gets delegated to the person who is ruling the actual, or holding the reins of power in the Islamic Republic. And I think this is very clearly most likely the direction that the Islamic Republic is heading towards.
And when it comes to the end of political Islam in general, how does that look inside of Iran? Like, for example, would you still be able to claim Sharia law?
I think Sharia law, given the Sharia law is a populist issue, obviously, in a lot of Muslim societies. I mean, a lot of lay Muslims do not know what Sharia law is. I think the most established example of applying Sharia law for a very long time was actually the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And even the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, since the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has moved a far away from the kind of Sharia law application in terms of hudud, the penal code that was executed publicly that we have seen. And the Saudi Kingdom is no longer funding the networks of Sharia enthusiasts and madrasas that used to promote these ideas globally. Number one. Number two, as I said, the region now has a very long experience with political Islam, with claims of political Islam, with attempts to apply Sharia law. These attempts ranged from things like the Taliban in Afghanistan, ISIS, and of course, Saudi Arabia itself. And I think there is now, especially among the Muslim urban middle classes, there is no wish to repeat any of those experiments. So likely, as I said, like in the case of political Islam, a lot of the slogans are going to survive, but you're going to have more ruthless instruments of power. Whatever is going to survive from the networks of the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood had a big blow since its defeat in the Arab Spring in Egypt, and then in Tunisia, and in other places, and now with everything that happened after October 7th, you're still going to have residue of Muslim Brotherhood movements, organizations, and powers. Are these then going to become more instruments of power for countries like Turkey and Qatar, basically going to be hired for the service of other states? We do not know. But at the same time, there is now a rising Muslim constituency in Western societies that are actually talking about Sharia law, or at least seem to have developed a form of Western Islamism that I think will be very interesting to watch how it evolves throughout the coming decade or so.
Yeah, that evolution is going to be fascinating. And you said a lot of the slogans would still survive. So when it comes to the end of political Islam and this new kind of ideology forming inside the Islamic Republic of Iran, would we still be hearing death to America, death to Israel? Would they have a reason to do that?
This translates beyond political Islam. I mean, as the Islamic Republic, there is an interesting growth also, and development of the ideology of the Islamic Republic that's happening, as you have also a global rise of there is a weird revival of mid-century anti-imperialist third world discourse that's happening kind of globally. And you see it online, and you're seeing it on the internet. And we've seen throughout the war, the Islamic Republic propaganda, especially on the web, leaned heavily into this. You remember all the AI videos they used to produce about even how they are somehow...
The Lego videos, yeah.
The Lego videos, and they had this weird video suggesting that they are somehow defending the little girls on Epstein Islands, trying to they're trying
This
to
idea of the oppressed and the oppressor, right?
and the Islamic Republic,
Which
this
they've
has been
always
in the
had.
DNA. Yeah, this has been obviously in the DNA of the Islamic Republic always, because it had this third worldist and anti-imperialist input.
Mustazafin,
ideology.
mustakbirin, like it's.
So this will survive even as actually the Islamist ideology itself becomes less believable and its premises is less believable. As a matter of fact, I would say that this will become even more important. That is,
So it sounds like they're becoming stronger. This is, you're scaring me. It sounds like they have more legitimacy now.
Anti-Semitism will become stronger because basically that becomes even a more important of a unifying a theme around which you can hold power and you can hold legitimacy. As your positive propositions decline in their believability and their salience, then whatever you hate or whatever you're mobilizing against becomes even more important.
And even more appealing to folks who are secular, for example.
Which is sadly happening due to unfortunate cultural developments that are happening. And this is why you find now, interestingly, and even segments from Western radicals who are sympathizing. You've always had this Western radicals sympathizing with the Islamic Republic.
Foucault is most famously, and Khomeini, yeah.
But even Foucault repented. Like a few years later, he's like, "Oh, I was too high on the revolution." But even from the United States, you find now these interesting characters who are siding with supposedly with the Islamic Republic. So I think a lot of these ideological themes, in terms of its anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, are going to actually become more important as a substitute for any positive proposition about Islamic governance the Islamic Republic did before.
Well, the evolution of political Islam and how it, morphs into something new after the elimination of Ali Khamenei is something to watch out for. Thank you so much, Hossein Mansour, for joining us today on Eye for Iran.
Thank you.
As we mark 6 months since the January massacre in Iran, another battle is unfolding, not just over power, but over memory. The Islamic Republic brought about 400 foreign influencers to Tehran to cover Ali Khamenei's funeral and project what officials called, quote-unquote, the correct and real image of the ceremony. At the same time, questions remain over which narratives about Iran actually get coverage and global attention, and which ones are quickly forgotten and why. Joining me now is Khosro Isfahani, an Iran analyst with the National Union for Democracy in Iran, and also he's a journalist. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Negar-Jan. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Khosro. Let's start there. Iranian officials say that there were about 400 foreign influencers and bloggers to Khamenei's funeral. You had, this Bushra Sheikh, Pakistani, British influencer. You have Hinkle, an American, Calla Walsh, another American. They're all chanting, death to America. All of them documenting the procession step by step and parroting the talking points of the regime to demonstrate, in their view, that they are still very popular. I also saw influencers like the podcaster Mario Nafwal tweeting that he had been lied to about Iran this whole time. So I think, it's obvious why the regime is doing this. And in some ways, it's obvious that it's working. But what does this tell us about how the media and how the public, how social media processes what matters in Iran?
First of all, when we talk about events like this in Persian, we describe it as Kashti Nuh, the Noah's Ark. From every animal, there was at least a pair. You had Max Blumenthal and Calla Walsh marching in Tehran, chanting death to America. The most infamous liars and Jew haters and America haters have brought to Tehran to push the Islamic Republic's propaganda for this corrupt, murderous regime. These are guns for hire. Whenever there is an opportunity, when there is easy money, they will jump on it. They have zero credibility, they have zero backbone, they have zero moral grounds, and they are going to use the Iranian suffering to make an easy buck. This is the crowd that we are dealing with. They are willing to watch the Iranians burn and die and suffer under the Islamic Republic and help this regime propagate its lies, its distortions of reality. What is happening inside Iran, the way international media is covering it, is absolutely disgusting. BBC has sent a crew to Tehran to cover this funeral procession. A journalist who described regime-organized rallies in the past, a couple of months after the January massacre of tens of thousands of Iranians, she was dispatched to Tehran and covering the 22 Bahman, the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution's state-organized rallies, as a family festival after tens of thousands were killed in Iran in cold blood. This is the same narrative that they are pushing. They have zero empathy, zero sympathy for Iranians suffering under the Islamic Republic. They are practicing parachute journalism, but they are a parasite on the profession of journalism. They are masquerading as journalists. They are using the suffering of Iranians as clickbait to build their career, that we have gone to Iran to cover Khamenei's funeral as well. Another feather in their hat. It's absolutely shameful and disgusting. Earlier today, there was a report in Jewish Chronicle detailing how BBC made a deal with the Islamic Republic to get access to this funeral, accepting that the footage that its own team is going to produce in Tehran will not be used by BBC Persian, throwing even the haphazard journalism of BBC Persian to get extra
Their own
access
colleagues.
to what? Exactly.
Their own colleagues. I mean,
their own colleagues, some of whom are receiving death threats from the Islamic Republic. That's disgusting. That's shameful. Shame on all of these individuals and institutions that are historically enabling the Islamic Republic to kill Iranians, to butcher our people, to cover up their crimes under the facade of this propaganda. They're helping this regime stay in power. One day this regime will be gone and the Iranian people will remember who stood by our side.
And all for access. President Trump stated recently that 54,000 Iranians were killed during the January crackdown. Of course, at Nufti and Iran International, we also have very similar numbers from our sources in the tens of thousands. Now, yet Khamenei's funeral ended up getting more attention than something so massive, that amount of people in just literally 2 nights. It's the biggest massacre in modern history, not just Iran, but modern history. You have a background as a journalist. You were with the BBC. Tell me why this is not getting the attention that it should.
When Iranians' lives ever mattered. Over the past 5 decades, we have seen our suffering, our death, our destruction of our homeland being pushed aside by world powers, by media, by the global population aside for an easy fix to the Islamic Republic problem of the world. When President Obama sat down with the Islamic Republic for a deal, we were on the streets in 2009 Green Movement chanting that Obama, Obama, you're either standing with them or with us. The same question is right now facing the world again. Again and again, we have been asking this. Who are you standing with? With these Islamist terrorists or with the Iranian people? The people who actually uphold the same values of liberty, democracy, justice, human rights, or a regime that is hell-bent on destruction of every democracy on the face of the earth? Many people in positions of power have decided that it's way easier to deal with terrorists rather than overthrowing them. They are making a big mistake there. But there is another side to this story as well. When Qasem Soleimani was killed by President Trump during his first term, many journalists, including at the BBC, they pushed the narrative that the Islamic Republic was building around this man. He was a national hero. People have come to the streets in droves, in tens of millions, and are celebrating his martyrdom and marking it as a national hero dying. The same thing is happening with Khamenei right now. The regime is pushing a narrative that Khamenei had built for years. A death cult that is celebrating death above life has now died. Its leader has died. And the regime is cashing on this investment that has been done over decades. And the world is gobbling up this story as if it's a gourmet meal, instead of reflecting on what they are repeating on the wavelengths of the radios, instead of understanding that all of this is part of a wider information war against the world, against the free world. They are just using it. They are just selling it as another product. There is no moral core to how media operates around the world. If there was, the world would know that they should side with the Iranian people, a population that has fought for freedom, has died for freedom, and is still struggling for freedom.
And it's interesting because Reuters had initially said, millions attended, but they themselves corrected that with satellite imagery and then changed it to thousands. Because I believe the satellite imagery had showed that at least one of, because this is a days-long event, but at one of the events for his ceremony, there was about 100,000 people. That's not a lot. That's really insignificant, especially if you look at the population, 100 million, let's say at most, 10 to 20% at most, that should produce way bigger numbers.
Yesterday, I was having exactly this conversation with another friend. The issue is when Khomeini died in 1989.
Oh, that was massive.
That was massive. That was significant. Iran was coming out of an 8-year war. The general population was aligned with the Islamic Republic to a great degree. The regime had not settled into becoming a machinery of oppression and corruption and pilfering the wealth of the whole nation. Under Khamenei, the Islamic Republic evolved and turned into this behemoth that has swallowed Iran and turned it into a jail for 90 million people. Yes, the regime has some supporters, but these are mercenaries. They are not actually aligned with the Islamic Republic in terms of ideology. Look at how the leaders of this regime are behaving. Look at how the children of this regime are behaving. None of them are abiding by the ideology and the principles that the Islamic Republic promotes.
The they're same out of the goes West with enjoying themselves.
Yeah, exactly. The same goes for their supporters. They are a small minority in Iran that have guns and have kept Iranians under chains. That's it. And with this rally around Khamenei's empty, probably, coffin, because we don't even know if there was a body there, if he was turned into red mist, or if there was a maimed body. No one knows. The rally that they have been able to pull together, bringing thousands of people to the streets, if a totalitarian state in a country with 90 million people cannot even do that, that would show a significant bankruptcy, even financially. The regime has enough financial resources to bring this amount of crowd to the street. No one was surprised by that. But the actual Iranians, where they are still celebrating Khamenei's death. Look at the tweets that are coming out of Iran. Look at the social media posts. People are mocking Khamenei's funeral left, right, and center.
And when you take a step back, is Iran, the Islamic Republic, is it trying to rewrite how 2026 will be remembered from a year defined and started with the January massacre to one defined by what they describe as national unity at Khamenei's funeral for their, martyred figure?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, people who masqueraded as opposition figures are aiding and abetting the Islamic Republic in this project. One, the Islamic Republic's project, the language that is emerging out of the regime is that they went toe-to-toe with the United States and Israel, the mightiest military force on the face of the earth, and they survived. They are selling that as a victory, and it's working, especially among the population in Arab states that have been aligned with the axis of resistance, the Islamic Republic's axis of terror. We are watching how this regime is gaining grounds in terms of aligning these populations with itself. That's the narrative that the regime is pushing. But at the same time, if you look closely, you see journalists who live in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, benefiting from the freedoms that these countries are providing them and then promoting the Islamic Republic's narrative. They write articles for major outlets promoting reestablishment of diplomatic relations with the Islamic Republic. The same regime that killed tens of thousands of Iranians in January, they publish articles in Atlantic promoting that Canada should stop any measures against this regime and reestablish diplomatic ties with this government. That's what they are doing outside Iran. At the same time, you have people inside Iran who in the past masqueraded as activists against the regime and now are arguing that, yes, a new group of the Islamic Republic has surged to power and maybe we can convince them to take incremental steps and change their behavior. So we are dealing with three groups that are fighting against the Iranian people who are seeking freedom, justice, and liberty. The regime on one side, its stooges in the West on the other, and in the middle you have people, hopefully gullible people inside Iran who believe that since Khamenei is dead, the regime is going to change. That's a pipe dream. The Islamic Republic, the war that this regime is fighting against the Iranian people, the war that is waging against the free world, it's not going to end as long as it is Islamic Republic. It's in its DNA. That's unchangeable.
And, marking 6 months since this massacre, share with some of the stories of the people who were killed to remember them.
At Nufti, we have been trying to profile some of these slain protesters. When you work as a journalist, as a human rights defender, you usually are stuck in the moment that the individual was killed. You're focused on how they were slain, who was responsible for it, what was the moment that they were killed like. And inadvertently, that erases the life of every and each slain protester, unfortunately. Part of it is because we have limited resources as media outlets, as human rights organizations. At Nufti, we have tried to change that. We have tried to focus on the actual lives of each of these individuals who braved guns and bullets, took to the streets, stood on the front lines of these battles against the Islamic Republic, and were killed. We have seen stories of fathers and mothers, daughters and sisters and brothers, grandmothers, who stood on the front line getting hit by bullets to just provide a fighting chance to others. But when you look at their actual lives, who they were, what they were doing, what they stood up for, they were not only a symbol of decency, but they were the anchors of the Iranian society, who we are as Iranians. They were the people who were anchoring us to being humane under the Islamic Republic's inhumane statehood. They were people who made us what we are today, people who were the reason why Iran is a worthy cause to fight for, people who were the absolute sign of decency of the Iranian nation, and they were killed. But this cannot repeat again and again and again. It has happened so many times. These are not casualties of a war or a conflict or a political project. Human resources are not infinite. How many rounds we can suffer under this Islamic Republic with the world turning a blind eye towards Iran? We don't have too many people left, people like the slain protesters of January, the slain protesters of November 2019, the Women Life Freedom Movement. They were the most decent sons and daughters of Iran, and we have lost all of them. How we are going to survive? That's what our mission is, to make sure that whatever it takes, we are going to stop the next rounds to be this bloody, to protect the civilians who are fighting the Islamic Republic. And we collectively, all of us in diaspora, have failed the Iranian nation. We have not done our share properly. If we had done, the Islamic Republic should have gone already. We haven't. We are still fighting. We are still fixing our past mistakes. But every time that I talk with the families of these slain protesters, every time that they thank us for just bringing a shred of light and attention to the stories of their loved ones who fought for freedom and justice and they were killed, and they thank us for bringing attention to these stories, I want the earth to open mouth so I can go down into hell and disappear. Because I have failed my people. People who have sacrificed everything they had with empty hands, have fought for freedom and justice, and still we have failed to bring the world to their aid. We need to fix that. The fight is not over as long as the Islamic Republic is in place. The Iranian people are going to continue fighting this regime. It is on us who are living in freedom, in liberty, in safety that the free world has provided us to provide them with the right resources to overthrow this regime once and for all. I'm tired of watching mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, children getting buried in Iran because they just demanded justice and liberty. How many deaths should we watch? How many suffering? How many years of suffering should we watch? It's enough. It's enough. We are all tired, but the mission is not over and we are not going to stop. None of us have the right to stop because the people inside Iran are not stopping. Despite the regime's oppression, despite the regime's propaganda, despite the traitors who are turning against the Iranian people's demands of justice, liberty, and absolute obliteration of the Islamic Republic, the fight is not over. As long as a single Iranian takes breath in Iran, as long as they are demanding absolute annihilation of this regime, as long as they are fighting for freedom and justice, we are going to keep marching. I have one life and I'm ready to sacrifice that for those people who are living in Iran, who are fighting this regime with their blood, with their lives, with the lives of their loved ones, because we have seen what this regime is doing to the families of the victims. After the January massacre, that was one of the bloodiest, as you mentioned, the most brutal modern example of state crackdown against a civilized, unarmed protest. That was what happened in Iran. But the brutality didn't end there. We have talked with families who were forced to go through hundreds of body bags to find the body of their loved ones. We have gone through testimonies from families who were beaten up because they wanted to bury their loved one in their village. We have gone through testimonies of the families whose loved ones' graves have been desecrated, and they are fighting. They are not leaving Iran. A lot of them are under a lot of pressure from the Islamic Republic because the regime want them to leave Iran, because they know that each of them are turning into a seed of a storm that is going to uproot the Islamic Republic. The regime is doing everything in its power to silence these people, but they are not bowing down in face of the oppression. They are not bowing down, and it's on us who are living in safety, in liberty, to provide them with support and convince the world that no deal with the Islamic Republic is going to contain this regime. No deal with the Islamic Republic is going to contain its threat to world economy, to the world's citizenry. How many Americans, Brits, Europeans, Arabs this regime has killed? How many Afghans this regime has orphaned? How many Lebanese people have fought and fallen in this regime's proxy wars? It's enough. We need to finish this regime. It's overdue. We still have a chance. There is an opportunity, and we are not going to give up.
I believe that the fight is far from over, and very thankful for everything that you do, Khosro. Thank you for joining us today, Khosro Isfahani on Eye for Iran.
Thanks for having me.
Well, if you liked this episode, you can hit the like button. You can also leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And you can sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. And you can also check out our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.